welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, we're going to look at something a little different. So this is a video on YouTube that's actually part of a college course on, what did he say here? It's like non-Western history, modern non-Western history. So this video specifically is by Professor, I'm going to mispronounce this, Girard. I'll put it in the description. I can never pronounce these things. And specifically, this video is about Caribbean slavery, and is titled When the Sugar Ruled the World, Plantation Slavery in the 18th Century Caribbean. So this is about an hour long, I think. No, it's about 23 minutes. So it's a decently long video. It's very, very interesting. Now, coming from the United States, we did not really learn about Caribbean slavery. We're very much obsessed with our South thing, where, at least where I'm at, basically we were taught, and no, this is wrong, but is pretty common in the Southwest and the South, where they teach this revisionist history where the American Civil War was about states' rights, not slavery, which, you know, it was kind of both. But the states' rights were connected to slavery. But we do not cover, ever, the slave trade in the Caribbean, which is actually a heck of a lot bigger. So, we're talking Jamaica and Haiti and all those tiny little islands everywhere. Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Martin, all those, you know, tropical paradise islands that are massively impoverished and filled with African Americans, or African whatever they are, because there was a massive slave trade. They also went to Brazil, so you find that as well. But this is specifically the Caribbean, and Cuba. Cuba's in here too. So it was messy, and most of the, quite frankly, most from this, watching this video, most of the slaves imported from Africa did not go to the United States. They went to these various islands of the Caribbean, which weren't obviously run by the United States, nor were they, some of them were run dealing with Great Britain, Spain, France, Denmark. Denmark has its whole other nasty history. One of these days, we'll look at Denmark and Africa. It's a nasty history. They were not nice. You also have, particularly in Brazil, Portugal. So, yeah, if you thought the slave trades and how African slaves were treated in the U.S. was bad, you know, got nothing on the Caribbean. This video is very, very interesting. Yep, they were just murdering people. They didn't care. There was a high turnover rate, which means they were killing off their slaves like crazy, and they didn't care. They just import more. Essentially, they were treating their slaves like they were a basically reusable commodity. I'm going to work you to die, and then just, you know, buy more, which is what they did. And sugarcane, specifically, was the major commodity there. So you had these people who were brought over because originally they tried to do the natives. That didn't work. As they tried to do it in the United States. Again, that doesn't work. You can't, it's very difficult to enslave the locals because you're enslaving people who are on their own land. They know how to leave you, they know where to hide, and they know the resources. So, and they're really, really stubborn. Not to mention the other big thing is disease. Yeah. As we are aware, North America brought over their nice little diseases, and they killed them off like crazy. Then they tried indentured servants from Europe. Well, that didn't work very well either, because malaria, brought over from Africa by mosquitoes, had taken root, as has yellow fever. Sorry about that. I don't know whether it's spring is coming or what. My allergies are going bonkers. So if my voice sounds a little scratchy, that's why. But back to this. So things like malaria and yellow fever was decimating everybody, which, you know, also what happened with the Panama Canal. The reason it took forever to build was yellow fever and malaria, which kills incessantly and a lot. So they just brought over the African slaves, and they'd already been exposed to a lot of the European diseases. They weren't dying from them. Their bodies were kind of adapted more to malaria and possibly even yellow fever. So, but mind you, they were still dying incessantly. So there was just a lot more of them. So, yeah, it was bad. And yeah, there were slave results. I believe in Haiti is the only one that actually succeeded, where they had the slave results. But he talks a lot about how they brought over their culture. So you have the African culture being mixed with Catholics mostly. A little bit of Anglican, but mostly, again, you have France and Spain and Portugal who were down here. Those were the major powers. So yeah, Catholics. Which again is what you find in the southern part of the United States as well. In Louisiana, because again, you know, French. And yes, the French traded the Louisiana Purchase, essentially. It was, I don't know whether they lost in a war or something. It's like, okay, we need to kind of sell things off. So they chose Martinique over the Louisiana Purchase, which was a big hunk of land, but it was underdeveloped, and they weren't really using it. They were mostly using some land along the coast. So it's like, you know what, we're more profitable down here. This is easier to control. Let the United States take it. So that's how we got there. So, but it's a very, very interesting video. Obviously, it's a professor. There's an entire, apparently, course here, and this is college level, so definitely this is not for the younger kids. They're not going to understand it, and they're talking. He's pretty blunt about what's going on here, including like mass murder, rape going on. Obviously, they had basically, you did have a hierarchical society. You had the whites at the top, the recent Africans brought over from Africa at the bottom, and then in between, you had the mixed. You had the people who had been born in the Caribbean, and then you had the people who, as is unfortunately very, very common, were born half black, half white. So you had the mulattoes, or the Creole, obviously, is kind of what they call them. So they're the mixed race. They are the result of black masters raping their female black slaves and having children. And they're somewhere in between. And he talks about how they can, because they're born there, because they have a little bit, they can ask and be offered more prestigious positions, more specialized positions, working in the household, working in woodworking or building things. They have marginally higher status within being slaves, and it's apparently easier for them to technically, and he talks about someone specifically who buys his freedom as well as that of some of his family members that were enslaved. But again, that is because he was mixed, and a lot of the people I believe he probably brought out were mixed. So it's an interesting dynamic. I believe this was through France. And yes, there were slave laws. They weren't supposed to do half the things they did, but who's going to stop them exactly? Particularly since Africans can't testify in court. So yeah, there was instances where, yes, you can torture your slaves, and even though they know what the heck you're doing, not much can be done about it. Even if, like, white people see it. So yeah, it was bad. And then you still have this mixed society there. It's a very, very interesting video. Again, this is not meant for the younger crowd. I would say middle school and up. Again, this is designed as a college course. So there is a series of videos. It's about 23 minutes long. I have not looked at this. Is the first time I've looked in this channel. It might be more interesting. It is the professor was born in the Caribbean. He now lives in Louisiana. So again, he's very, very familiar with this society because this is his ancestry. So this is how he grew up. So he knew he's a descendant of these enslaved people and the slave owners as well, as is unfortunately very, very common. The vast majority, I would say, of African Americans in the United States probably have at least one white plantation owner in their family tree, if not more, because of the rape that went on and how really normal it was. Even if it wasn't just a plantation owner, they were considered objects. The women were just considered objects. So having sexual relations with somebody's slave was more akin to you having sex with somebody's dog and you damage their property. Now, is this wrong? Yeah. But this is how society worked. That was how society worked at the time. That was how they were viewed. That's the reason it was called chattel slavery. I mean, most of us have seen the pictures of the massive slave ships where they're just jam-packed and half of them end up dying because they're going over in a horrible conditions and they die. The best other thing that you can compare it to is them ramming Jews into trains off to slaughter them. Only the death of these slaves was accidental. They just didn't care. The Jews were intentionally being murdered. These guys, some of them lived, some of them died, and then we're going to take them off somewhere where some of them will live, some of them will die. We don't really care. They were considered objects. They didn't consider them human in the first place. So, and that's just kind of the way it was. So, yeah, it was horrible. This is a very dark but very realistic video about something that I didn't know about. And I didn't realize that the vast majority of it was into the Caribbean. And there were times where he said the ratio of whites to slaves could go up to 90%, where you had 10% were the slave owners, and then you have 90% slaves on these islands. So, which is very, very, again, it was a different situation than in the Americas. There's also the idea that escaping was a little bit harder when you're on an island. I mean, technically, on larger islands, it was easier. Possibly Brazil was definitely easier. But, yeah, there's not a lot of places you can go when you're on an island. I mean, I've been to some of the Caribbean islands. They're not particularly places like St. Martin and St. Lucia. They're very small. It was, if you went there, it was live or die. And who knows what your chances were, depending on who you were. If you survived the boat over, could you survive a life as a slave? I mean, you could be killed off by things like malaria, or, your master had sex with you and he gives you gonorrhea or syphilis or something, and that kills you. And God knows what else. From malaria and yellow fever, you could still probably die of smallpox, because people were still dying. Smallpox, of measles, of mumps, of whooping cough, of dozens of other, tuberculosis. Just like everybody else. You could be killed off by dozens of diseases, but you were also in crappy conditions. You were not necessarily fed. You were certainly not always clothed or possibly even housed properly. So your immune system sucked, and you were pretty much being worked to death. And because they didn't care. And just buy more. Just like you throw away a plastic bottle. It seems like that's the way they thought. It's like, so the people there are true survivors. They're seriously, they're true survivors, and they brought over their culture. That's the other thing he does talk about. And their language. Like in Jamaica, they do speak this, what would be amount to be called almost pidgin, or a Creole mixed language of the, depending on who their colonizers were, and African languages. And so it does intermix. So it is also very, very interesting. So this is a good video to talk about when you're talking about slavery, when you're talking about what was going on in different places. Because again, as I learned just by watching this video, most of the African slave ships weren't headed for the Americas, or at least not North America. They were headed for the Caribbean, where sugar was king, and sugar plantations, and there was hard labor, and it was a tropical environment, and they were pretty much treated like disposable objects. So great video, definitely middle school and up. Highly recommend it. I will link the video before. You might want to check out the rest of the channel if you're looking for other stuff. This, again, it's not too long. It's only about 23 minutes. He does have experts on there. You do hear some of the music, some of the language, stuff like that. I was watching this while also dealing with some other editing and other things, including getting videos off my computer, because these things take up a lot of space. So if you like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe. I am covering Caribbean heritage this month. This is probably the darkest that I'm covering this month. Otherwise, I'm covering a bunch of children's picture books. But there's not a lot of media I can find. Cool Runnings is on here. I think that's the other thing that I'm covering, because I literally cannot find any other family-related films. And Cool Runnings is just fun and interesting and useless, but it's fun. So, as well as various children's picture books. That's the counter off. And that is my typical format, if you're not familiar with the channel. I do books, and then I do some sort of film or media. A lot of times I'll do YouTube, depending on what I can find. I mean, quite honestly, royalty is hard to find films when you're not dealing with Cinderella stuff, which is a whole other kettle of fish there. And yes, I've covered those. If you want, I think I have an entire playlist on various Cinderella adaptations, including various books. So, and I'm doing the Princess Diaries this year. Those should be out by the time you see this. And I counterbalanced them with another YouTuber called Lindsay Holiday, who does History Tea Time. And then I did some other videos countering the Tamora Pierce series, and then I stopped countering that because I'm doing Guardians of Gahul, which is owls, and there are 15 books and like 18 videos. I cannot find that many things on owls. I was not going to try. But also I'm covering LGBTQ this year, vaccines, I think more Asian American history. I know I'm doing at least one video on Angel Island. We'll probably do more next year. So there's a lot of stuff available right now. I have a lot of stuff in the past. I have covered African American History Month at least twice. So be sure to check out the rest of the channel. Check out my playlist, like and subscribe, and leave a positive comment if you have one. Thank you.